task, you learn how to relate tables located in different worksheets and search for information using the VLOOKUP function. In this task, you will learn about another strategy for data analysis, which is using pivot tables. Pivot tables allow you to summarize and analyze the data by seeing comparisons in your data. To create the pivot table, you will first highlight the entire sales table by doing it manually or by clicking on any cell on the table and then typing Control A, and it'll automatically highlight all the data from the table. Then to add the pivot table, you will go to Insert in the ribbon and then select Pivot Table. Here, it will ask you to define the table or range, which you have already done by highlighting the cells. Then it will ask you to choose where you want the pivot table report to be placed. I always recommend selecting New Worksheet so its placement doesn't affect the other data that already exists in the current worksheet. Now we'll click OK, and you will see that a new worksheet appears to the left of the sales data worksheet. Now that we have the new worksheet, let's create the first pivot table. To the left, you'll see the empty pivot table, and to the right of the screen, you'll see a section called Pivot Table Fields, where you will define what information you would like to plot on your pivot table. To create a pivot table, you will define the categories as either filters, columns, rows, or values. In the values category, you will only have numbers. So in our case, this could be the units column for the number of chairs sold, or the final price column, for example. If a category is specified as a column, it will appear in the pivot table as the columns of the table. And the same applies to rows. Then for filters, this is less commonly used, but you can also have a category appear as a filter with a drop-down menu to select from. It's probably easier to understand with an example. Imagine your boss asks you to calculate how much each sales representative made in sales throughout the first 6 months of the year. In the value section, you would want to include the final price category since it shows the total profit from each sale after the wholesale discount. And this one makes sense because that final price category has numbers in them, right? So we would drag that to values to include it in our pivot table. Then you will also want to include the sales representative category. But where should this one go? Well, the good news is that it doesn't really matter. You can either put it as rows or columns. The information displayed will be exactly the same, but the arrangement of the pivot table will be a little different, and we could test this. So if we take the sales representative category and we drag it to columns, we could see that for each sales representative, we get the sum of the total income from their sales. But we could move the sales representative, to rows instead of columns, and we get the same information, just the arrangement is now a little different. Pivot tables are a great way to obtain specific information very quickly. And you can also do multiple comparisons at once. To add on to this pivot table, let's say that we now want to calculate how much each sales representative made in sales every month. We would still keep the final price category in the values, and then you could put the sales representative in columns, for example, and then the month category in rows. And now let's see what the pivot table looks like. Well, we have the different sales representatives as columns, and then we have the different months from January to June as rows. And here we get the total income from sales for each sales representative for each month. As a little challenge, try using the pivot table to calculate how many chairs of each model were sold each month. Pause the video to complete the pivot table and come back when you're done. Great job. Let's see how we would do this. If you ever have a pivot table already made and you want to start one from scratch, you could do so by deselecting the categories that you previously had to start with a blank pivot table. So in this case, we wanted to analyze or see how many models or how many chairs of each model were sold in each month. So in this case, the values that we want to plot are not the final price, but the number of chairs sold. So that will go in values. Then you could add the model as columns and the month as rows, or you could have these flipped and you would get the same information. It's just the table would look a little different. So now our pivot table is showing for each model of chair what was the number of chairs sold. So now we're not looking at price or income, but the number of chairs sold in each month of that year. If you would like, you could pause the video to explore more combinations with pivot tables. Congratulations, you have successfully completed the course Introduction to Data Analysis using Microsoft Excel. In this project, you have learned how to use different tools and functions to perform data analysis. You've learned how to use sorting and filtering tools to reorganize your data and access specific information about your data. You've also learned how to use the if function to perform some data mining with your data, and how to use the VLOOKUP function to relate data from different tables. Finally, you have learned how to create pivot tables to summarize and look at comparisons within your data. Your new skills will help you efficiently perform data analysis on many different types of data and give you the foundation to expand your toolbox as you start exploring other strategies for data analysis. Thank you very much for completing the project Introduction to Data Analysis using Microsoft Excel, and I hope to see you soon in another guided